One of England's longest running monarchs was Queen Victoria. She passed away on the 22nd of January 1901, and the 81-year-old Victoria had ruled for roughly 64 years. This was a colossal amount of time, and her reign was one which saw the British Empire at its prosperous height, and the people in her country began to be known as Victorians. She had a significant impact on history. However, her death caused a great shock, and when the monarch died, such time had passed in her long reign that people did not know how to prepare for a state funeral. Join us today as we look at the painful death of Queen Victoria, and remember to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Queen Victoria's final years of her reign were rather turbulent and strained. In 1900 in particular, Victoria had a distressing year, which was filled with a significant amount of upset. Britain had been fighting in the Boer War, and the loss in the war and conflict caused her significant amounts of stress, and her eldest son Edward, who was the heir apparent to the throne, was shot. He had been shot in an assassination attempt in protest over the Second Boer War, and at the time was going through Belgium when an assassin, just a young boy, fired bullets at him. Victoria's eldest daughter also was sick that year. Vicky, the Dowager Empress of Germany, had been diagnosed with agonising breast cancer, which had already spread around her body, and in particular to her spine. The Queen's daughter's health was a great shock and was very sad for Victoria, but then another son, Alfred the Duke of Edinburgh, also passed away. Victoria regarded him as her favourite son, and Alfred, who was not living the healthiest of lifestyles before, for example smoking heavily and drinking heavily, died from throat cancer. His passing in particular shocked the English Queen and upset her greatly. The English royal family during this time began to become surrounded by important deaths, as Victoria's much-loved and treasured grandson, Prince Christian, passed away from a fever whilst he was away in South Africa within the British Army. One of the Queen's best friends, Lady Churchill, whom the Queen had known for a very long time, also passed away in her sleep and bed while she was visiting the monarch at Osborne House. These moments all had a huge effect on the Queen, who in her years had experienced very serious bouts of depression. In particular, when her husband died, she suffered greatly from this. But towards the end of the 1800s, Victoria was not her normal self. She would not eat as much as she previously did, and lost lots of weight, causing doctors and family to worry a great deal about her. She eventually became wheelchair-bound, and also suffered with her eyesight, and often became very confused. Victoria, who was once head of the British Empire, and who had been Queen for over 64 years, was coming to terms with her end, and was beginning to slip away. She noted how, "Another year has begun. I am feeling so weak and unwell that I enter upon it sadly," showing that in fact she was down, depressed, and coming to terms with her death. Within 3 years of the start of 1901, Queen Victoria passed away on the 22nd of January, and the Queen's residence on the Isle of Wight, Osborne House, was placed under a very strict lockdown. Not one person was allowed to leave for a brief period inside of the household, and the phone lines were taken down, and a crowd had gathered outside the entrance gates to the residence. On the small bulletin board outside, a note was placed. It read, "Osborne House, January 22nd, 6:45 p.m. Her Majesty the Queen breathed her last at 6:30 p.m, surrounded by her children and grandchildren." The news of the Queen's death travelled very quickly, and it took many by surprise. For large amounts of the population, Victoria's reign was all that they knew, as she had reigned for so long. No one really knew how to prepare also for the Queen's state funeral, and how to arrange this. The Queen had been ill for a while, and the public had been constantly told that she was not in fact poorly, and doctors had stated for a long time that she was not dying. But one of her doctors, James Reed, a man who had looked after Victoria's health for 20 years, realised that Victoria was about to pass away. He tried to tell the royals that she was dying, but no one would listen, but he could not convince any of them that this was happening. It's been debated for a long time what actually killed Queen Victoria, and despite suffering with confusion and delirium, she had also been suffering with other conditions. Victoria had been suffering with rheumatism, which affected her legs, and forced the Queen into a wheelchair in her final days, affecting her mobility, meaning that she could not get around as she had previously. Also, her eyesight was poor, and she suffered from cataracts. No doubt this was distressing for the Queen, with her sight deteriorating, but this would not have killed her, just affected her mood, struggling to see things which she previously would have been able to do so. She also complained throughout the month that she was weak and generally felt unwell and sick, but as the month continued, she began to feel worse and dazed and confused. She did state to her doctors at one point that I should like to live a little longer, as I have a few things to settle, showing that she had fighting spirit and that she did not want to succumb to her deteriorating condition. After the 17th of January, it seemed like things went downhill for the long-reigning monarch, as she suffered from what could be attributed to being a stroke. Strokes can kill instantly, but with Victoria they occurred in a short amount of time and caused her to suffer a great deal of pain. Following these strokes, the royal family were immediately ordered to come to the Isle of Wight. It was very clear to anyone than the doctors that Victoria was on death's door, and preparations were made for her successor, and for the government to stop, as the Queen could not effectively carry out her duties. The royal family gathered around in Victoria's small bedroom, and along with the Bishop of Winchester, they prayed and said their final words to the Queen. Priests sung prayers and hymns by her side, and the Kaiser of Germany was summoned, Victoria's grandson, who was also there by her bedside. The Queen was conscious but could not see, and the deathbed was surrounded by her closest family. Each of them kissed the Queen's hand and said farewell in their own way. Clerics continued to chant and sing in an attempt to rally the Queen, but this did not happen. It's believed that the strokes the Queen suffered caused Victoria's death, but it's also considered that she had a short and painless illness that took her life. Others believe that Victoria simply died from old age, as she was very frail, and other people consider that she had a cerebral hemorrhage. Victoria had been ill for some time, and her health was only going one way. The Queen looked very thin as she did not eat, and she grew tired and confused more often. It's most probable that a short illness was responsible, coupled with her old age. But Victoria did not die alone. She was surrounded by her family, including her successor, her eldest son, and also the Kaiser of Germany, her eldest grandson. Following her death, there was a significant degree of confusion as to how to plan for the Queen's funeral. Victoria had ruled for simply so long that no one had experience in doing this. After her death, Kaiser Wilhelm ordered a death mass to be made, and this was against the wishes of the Queen, who would not have liked this. Also, during the preparations for the funeral, the Duke of York was taken very ill by a dangerous illness, and the royal undertakers then arrived on the Isle of Wight to take Victoria's body back to London. But he forgot to bring a coffin, which caused further delay, and a new coffin was built by a local carpenter, then brought to Osborne House. Victoria's doctor and her dresser prepared her body for her coffin, and they refused to embalm the Queen and threw charcoal on the floor to stop the smell and to absorb any moisture. They also cut her hair and dressed Victoria in a white silk dressing gown with a garter ribbon and a star, putting her wedding veil over her face. Then the new king, the Kaiser, and other royal dukes came into the room to lift the body into the coffin. A number of objects were placed inside her coffin. These included one of her husband's dressing gowns, a plaster cast of his hand, a lock of her confidant and close friend John Brown's hair, and a picture of him, along with pieces of jewellery. The wedding ring of John Brown's mother was also strangely placed on Victoria's hand. The coffin then made its way to London under a guard of battleships and cruisers crossing the Solent, and it had a huge military procession. The official funeral service took place first, and then a smaller one in the mausoleum that Victoria had built for Albert at Frogmore. As her body was lowered into the vault, Kaiser Wilhelm II and Edward VIII knelt by her coffin. Queen Victoria was one of the longest reigning royals to reign over England, but her final moments were met with pain and sorrow for the woman who was once a symbol of immense power. It was Victoria who was referred to as the Empress, but she grew weak and ill very quickly. However, she did pass away, surrounded very closely by her friends and family and lots of love. Thanks for watching. Once again, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.